Find the courage to be honest with yourself about what you really want in your sexual relationships and intimate relationships. And then find the courage after that to be honest with others about what you want. And trust the process of recovery and allow yourself to evolve, allow yourself to change as the steps and the spirit kind of evolves and moves us.
I heard it through the grapevine. Welcome. It's the AA Grapevine half-hour variety hour featuring the collected voices of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm Sam, an alcoholic in Palm Springs, California.
And I'm Olis, an alcoholic, currently in Irmo, South Carolina. I'm excited about today. Today's episode is a hot topics, and guess what today is?
What?
Sex! Oh my
God! Sam and Olis sitting in a tree. K.I.
Sam, nobody's going to believe that story.
I know. That's what makes it all the better.
Today we have two guests, both with long-term sobriety, right? We've got Scott H. He is from Durham, North Carolina, where I just left. And then we've got my friend Debbie D. from Concord, California. So excited to have them.
You know, we've been wanting to do this podcast episode for a while. You know, hot topics, we only do them a couple times a year or so. But, you know, sex. It is that topic so often when it's brought up in a meeting. I love how a meeting has all this wonderful conversation before the meeting starts, and then the meeting starts and people maybe read the tools or whatnot, and then they bring up the topic of sex and it's crickets.
Yeah. I think that this is absolutely a Rule 62 experience, right? We shouldn't take ourselves too seriously. If you look at the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, like it's got to be Bill's sense of humor that sex is on page 69. I mean, we absolutely shouldn't take ourselves. And it says that we all have sex problems, like we wouldn't be human if we didn't, right? And what are the options that were offered? You know the options that were offered in the book, right?
Oh, yes. That thing about no flavor for our affair or a straight pepper diet.
Absolutely.
I may have a t-shirt that says straight pepper diet on it.
I just saw that at a conference. Straight pepper diet. Yeah. I would actually be lying if I put that on my shirt.
Oh, man. Well, you know, there's a lot to talk about here, right?
That's good because this is an audio podcast.
It is good indeed.
You can give a gift subscription of Grapevine or Lavinia.
Grapevine has a long waiting list of incarcerated members who want one. Get your group, district, area, or AA friends to join in.
It's easy. Go to aagrapevine.org and look for Carry the Message at the top of the site.
Instead of this show being about you and me and sex, Sam and Olis sitting in a tree.
Okay.
Instead, let's meet our guests. Let's meet first Debbie.
Hi, everybody. I am Debbie, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February 8, 1976, which means I've been with you for over 48 years. I'm an active, invested member in my home group, which is the Primary Purpose Group in Dublin, California. I'm actively sponsored and I sponsor. I'm a 3 Legacy sponsor. So we go over the steps, the traditions, and the concepts. And this is my least favorite topic to be on discussion with. So there you go.
All right. Debbie?
Thank you for saying yes.
Thank you for the candor, and thank you for joining us. Scott, would you introduce yourself, please?
I'd be glad to. My name is Scott H. I live in Durham, North Carolina. I got Sober in 1987. My sobriety date is April 1st. Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Scott, so glad you joined us.
So, Debbie, what gave you the bright idea that coming to AA might be the right thing to do?
I was introduced to AA in May of 1975 through a treatment center. And I had no desire to get sober, let alone stay sober. I was 17 and a half years old, maybe when I was old, like 30, right? Because 30 is old when you're 17.
Yeah.
I would have 2 relapses, but the second relapse is when I had my psychic change. And being loaded or altered in any fashion really became almost like repulsive to me. I had been to enough AA meetings to know that those people in AA seemed to know what to do. And so on February 8th, my first sober day, is when I went and I asked them, what do you do to stay sober? And they gave me what I call the formula for success. They shared with me 7 things that they did.
Oh,
Real quickly, that is a sobriety date, a home group, a sponsor, take the steps. The traditions aren't just for the group. Learn how to apply them in your personal life, be of service, and carry the message. And those have been my guideposts for 48 years.
wow. I love that.
Scott, would you give us a little background on you, please?
My name is Scott H. I got sober in Houston, Texas on April 1st, 1987. I was in college trying to finish my architecture degree. I'd started seeing a counselor because my life was falling apart and had 2 near-death experiences with a combination of alcohol and drugs and was not going to finish school, and everything was coming unraveled. And I went to see a counselor who suggested I needed treatment, and treatment sounded like a safe place for me to escape and not be accountable for all the disasters that were happening around me. And that's how I got introduced to 12-step recovery. One of my friends in school who was also in a 12-step recovery for another affliction, when she came to visit me, and I had no idea that she was in 12-step recovery, she said, Scott, I just think you're going to like AA. I think you're going to like the 12 steps and these people. And she was right. I met my tribe, got sober at the Lambda Center, which was a predominantly gay and lesbian recovery house in Houston, Texas. I think to this day, it's the largest recovery club in the city of Houston. There's something about 12-step philosophy that really speaks to me. I'd never felt so at home and welcome as I did in that room. So yeah, I'm really grateful to be here still.
Fantastic. Glad you're here too, Scott. Debbie, can you sum up 48 years of recovery in 1 minute?
I'll give it a try.
Okay.
It has been many phases of my development. There have been many, whether it be growing up, relationships, work behavior, and spirituality. There have been many, many phases of my development.
That was beautiful. Scott, real quick, what is a week in the life of your recovery today?
Wow. I've got 2 meetings a week that I try really, really hard to make no matter what. One of them is a Zoom meeting on Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. The other one is an in-person meeting down the road in Raleigh at 7 p.m. at night. I have service positions in both of these meetings, and I have my own business that I'm at a point in my life, and most importantly, in my recovery, where I have some long-term rewards that come from long-term recovery. Sometimes those rewards feel like problems and things feel unmanageable. And I'm reminded of the second half of the second step. And it's like, oh yeah, I'm unmanageable. And then I remember the first half of the first step. And it's like, I can surrender any time for anything. I can let my higher power take over. And I always forget that, and it's one of the reasons why I stay close to people in recovery, because they remind me I always have help. It's only a desperate wave away.
Folks, Debbie and Scott, I really wish that we could sit here and explore all of this time and experience that you have in recovery, but let's jump into it. It's time for our hot topic, the ever-present, ever-popular subject of sex.
A lot of times we're in meetings and we hear people say things that are not in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe inferred, maybe not, based on our experience, right? But probably the number one thing you hear people say is no relationships for the first year. So I'd love to hear from you, Debbie and Scott. Is this good advice?
Well, we're not sure because so few people have ever done it. And while, I understand the purpose of it is if you get involved, it just creates the distraction. It's not like we don't want you to have fun in your life, but when we say no relationships, what are we really saying? Right? Because most of us don't have a clue what a relationship is.
Yeah.
The development of a relationship. It's usually a sexual encounter and we start hanging out with each other is what happens. Now, personally, I never tell a sponsee that.
Yeah.
It just doesn't appear to be useful because when you tell most people don't, that becomes the do.
Right.
It's
I
like,
have to.
Are you saying we might be obstinate?
I'm saying the example is if I say don't have chocolate cake, you are salivating for chocolate cake,
Yes.
right? So I don't even bother with it. But when they do get involved, I'll say, now, do you really feel that you have equipment to be in a good and healthy relationship, or are you going to repeat what you've been in?
Yeah.
Which clearly hasn't been very successful. And so it's really not, we don't want you to have fun or have a partnership in life, but we haven't really learned how to go about it yet. But I look and I think about in step 12, it refers in the 12 and 12, it refers to that each person would like to have a partnership. They've changed the words on that. And spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical union, right? A full union, and it gives those four. And not too long ago, a few years ago, I thought, wow, I don't know if this was an intentional order, a divine order, or quite what, but I thought, what if we did go into relationships? First, spiritually, do we connect? Mentally, can we have conversations? Emotionally, does this person feel safe? And then physical. Usually we do it backwards.
Yeah.
First we get physical, then
Yeah.
we get woo, emotions are wow, he's got potential. And then we have to remember one day we're going to have a conversation and then connect spiritually. So what if we actually did it in that order of spiritual, mental, emotional, physical? We would have some healthier relationships probably.
Interesting thought. Yeah. Scott, what do you think?
I came into recovery in this tension of what myself and all my gay friends were doing, and then what we were aspiring to, which was what we observed and thought that all of our straight friends were doing. So we had this heteronormative ideal of like, picket fence and a monogamous relationship, but this behavior that was, still born out of the sexual revolution, which had kind of come to a close right when I got sober. In my first year, I was having recreational sexual encounters with other people in the room. And for me, the danger of a relationship in early recovery and any kind of relationship, the combination of a relationship or friendship with sex and intimacy, I'm very clear that I didn't understand the difference between that and a higher power. And it's so easy to make a person who you have strong emotional feelings for, to make them my higher power. And that's the danger for me, is if I get confused and start thinking of this person as what's going to save me, what's going to keep me sober, or the idea that I'm not a complete child of God in my own right, like unless I've got a partner, that's the danger for me. For me, how it's changed is what I understand today, that the most important quality in a relationship is honesty. And the most important aspect of honesty, frankly, is honesty with myself. And that is, what kind of relationship do I want? And my criteria, which is entirely out of the big book, about whether a relationship is healthy or not, is whether I'm hurting somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm not hurting somebody, I'm not necessarily doing something wrong just because it doesn't look like the kind of relationship that other people have, right?
Right.
The work to find a sexual ideal, as it says in the book, is some of the hardest work that we'll ever do in this 12-step life, because it's very scary to ask for something that maybe doesn't fit into the larger cultural norms.
Yeah.
Today, my relationship, I got married in November to a man I've known for 12 years. And
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you. Our relationship does not look like other relationships, but it's one that he and I are both very happy with. And there's an enormous amount of honesty and trust with one another, and everyone else can go take a hike.
Scott,
Yeah.
I love that. And I love how you brought it back to the real danger is that we will make someone our higher power. That's really the slippery slope. And not all of the people who come into Alcoholics Anonymous do so single. Some people are in relationships already. They're married.
Yeah.
And so the book gives this great advice. It says we are not the arbiters of anyone's sex life. But I would love for you and Debbie to talk about what do you do with a sponsee and all they can do is think about sex. Oh my God. It is an overwhelming drive and urge. As sponsors, what do you say to folks?
So I've never had that question. I can't think of anything except sex. I've had certainly obsessions about human beings. And there's that paragraph on page 70 that says, when sex is troublesome, and I change the word and I say to sum up about obsessions, because everything in the rest of that paragraph, whatever my obsession is, answers and guides me on the right path. So I will yield to avoid heartache. And that's such a great paragraph. For sponsees, when they're obsessed about a partner, look, I will listen 5 minutes because I know it's all consuming. And then we have to go on to recovery things. We need to tell me about your meetings, your sponsees, what you're doing in your life, because I realize I want to give them that venting time. But it's not useful for me to allow the entire time to be blah blahing about the relationship person, whether it's a obsession or they're in a relationship and they're unhappy with the behavior or what they're doing or not doing. And part of it too is I'll say, are you interested in the solution? Are you interested in my experience? Because if I don't, it's then sounds like I'm telling them what to do and I'm talking to a brick wall. So I've learned to ask more questions than give guidance unsolicitedly or uninvitedly. But that paragraph we referred to a lot, that obsession. Well, I'm useless when I'm in obsession. That's why step 3's prayer, relieve me of the bondage of self. I'm the one who puts me in a mummified position when I'm obsessed or angry or living in fear. I am now useless, but I've put myself in that position. So let's get useful.
Scott, do you have some thoughts there?
Well, one of the things that I heard early on was just remember the 3 M's: meetings, meditation, and masturbation. So I sponsor people of all genders and all sexual orientations, but I think an obsession about a behavior and an obsession about a particular person, I would probably handle differently. But with sex, one of the things in our culture are the dating and sex apps that are available right now. I think it's very important in early recovery I think a lot of people are not able to pursue their sexual, recreation or activity in a way that doesn't expose them to opportunities with alcohol and other substances. So coming off of the apps and deleting those apps is a pretty typical strategy right now. The other thing that I do though is I tell them about what happened to me. And, it took me a while to learn how to have sex sober. It was not easy, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I hurt people, and I tried different things and then discovered things that didn't work. But I have learned, and the sex life that I have today as someone with long-term sobriety is so much more satisfying and freeing. And so reminding folks that look, you may need to adjust your behavior for a while until you can get your legs under you and really get some recovery under you and get centered on the fact that you have this disease that's trying to kill you. And one of the ways it's going to come for you is with sex. And you just need to be careful. But I'm not telling you that you've got to give this up for the rest of your life.
Scott, that takes us right into another question here, and that is, what in the world is sober sex like? Is it possible? Because there is a great fear about sober sex with some folks, and the fear that sex will lead to drinking again.
Yeah, well, one of my main strategies around that is I'm very overt about the fact that I'm in recovery. I'm not interested in having sex with someone who's drunk. I'm not ashamed to let people know ahead of time in early conversations that I'm in recovery. So if you need to be drunk in order to have sex, that's not going to work. That's one thing. I have a very strong outer message that gets promoted first. The other thing about sober sex is no different than all of the other aspects of my life. One of the great outcomes of practicing 12-step philosophy is I become a whole human. And whole humans evolve and change as they get older. And one of the things that recovery has given me is as I get older, I feel like my life gets richer and more expansive. And that's not the experience of most people. Most people, as they get older, their world gets smaller and they become more afraid. And it's a very normal human thing for our world to get smaller as we get older. But I know so many people like Debbie and, with this long-term sobriety, and their hearts and their minds just expand constantly. And sex is no different. The things that interest me today did not interest me 20 and 30 years ago. And it's a good thing.
I love that you are talking, Scott, about sex as an evolutionary thing. I'm also class of 87, right? What was interesting to me sexually when I got here is a really different thing than now, not less, deeper. And so it really makes me want to hear from both of you what your experience has been in and around the rooms, watching people struggle with 13th stepping. And if you would just, for listeners that don't know what that is, give your definition and how you've seen it get in the way of recovery.
My 3 M's were a little bit different. Scott brought that up. When I was 6 years sober and really in a rocky place, people, places, and things were going to make me happy, but it was really called Men, Money, and Mansions are going to make me happy.
Yes, girl.
So those were my 3 M's.
Yes.
And I made sure I did not get those things, or you would have a different speaker here tonight. I would have been drunk. But anyway, the 13th stepping and what I've seen, obviously we have to watch out for the new women. But I know I was somebody who you could have said, stay away from that guy, and I probably would have been drawn to them.
Right.
There are predators, financial, sexual, bullies in every aspect of society.
Yeah.
We, a church, all the places you should be safe. And I got to remember, we don't get the well people.
Right.
And just because they don't drink doesn't mean recovery has happened and they've addressed some of their defects of character. But there are those who also want to be sober, and it can be good pickings. And it's not limited to men. I've seen longtime women sober too, pick up the new guys.
Yep.
And all we can do is, we as the elders, we've had conversations with the men and with the women. I can't control what they do. None of us are the AA police, but I can keep an eye out on what's going on. If I see them kind of saddling up to the new girls, I will go in and step in and say, hey, come on over here with us.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have a responsibility to offer recovery inside the rooms in a safe place. And more groups are reading the safety card. More and more, they might have their own language that they're saying. The predatorship has been around forever, regardless of the society. We're not going to get rid of it because it's comprised of a human being. But what we can do is our protection as best as we can.
Yeah, I love Debbie's focus on safety. So I define 13th step as mixing up my recovery work with my sexual interest in another person in the rooms. So technically, for me, having sex with another sober person is not in and of itself a problem. We're adults, and especially if both of us are sober by any reasonable definition, which doesn't mean you've been going to a meeting, for a week and that's it, but
Right.
but if you have a sponsor and you're working the steps and you've got a higher power and you've been around for a while, then we're all adults here, right? Y'all work it out. But if one is taking emotional advantage or sexual advantage of someone under the auspices of mentoring them in recovery, that to me is the danger line.
That is 13th stepping. Yes.
That's 13th stepping. That also doesn't mean, and my opinion on this has changed. As someone who now has 37 years, I'm very careful about sexual interest with someone who's counting months or even just a couple of years. The power dynamic and the maturity dynamic is too great. That creates so many potential problems. So I just add that to the mix right now. If there's a big delta in the length of time of recovery or sobriety, I think it's fraught with peril. There's a danger, where people can get hurt. And it's not just the newcomer that can get hurt with this stuff. We all know that.
Absolutely. Scott, that takes us right into how do I apply the steps in determining sexual partners and or intimate relationships?
I think that section of the big book on page 69 is one of the most remarkable parts of the big book because it's so not what I'm expecting a bunch of, white men in 1930s to write at that time in our society. Trying to be sensible about it, trying to make sure that we're not hurting somebody. And just accepting the fact that everyone's got a different vibe with this, and God alone is our judge on these things.
Debbie, in the big book, it uses this question: what should I have done instead? It's a question out of our sex inventory, which, is really my sex misconduct, right? Because I'm not writing down the things I got, right. I'm writing down the things where I'm like, yeah, I hurt someone. And I add up all the things I should have done instead. That becomes my ideal.
What should I have done instead becomes very powerful. I use that in a lot of categories, whether it's picked up a drink or took a bad action. Whatever caused or reason I use to do that, something similar will come up again. I use this a lot. If I could rewind the tape, what would I have done differently? It's like prepares me. Not that we're trying to project the future, but I feel like I got more tools to work with in that. We ask God to mold our ideals and then help me to live up to them. So if I want someone who's monogamous, I got to be that way. If I want someone who's financially responsible, I need to be that way. So what I'm looking for, I need to be.
Yeah.
And that was some of the tools that I used in how I met my current husband. And we just celebrated 23 years of marriage.
Woo-hoo!
Yeah. So I had this imaginary God box that when I'd get to feeling kind of lonely and all that, I would toss in an ideal. And because it's not going to come true, I could shoot for Mars and land on the moon kind of thing. So, when you're 20 and 30 and 40 and 50, your ideals change. When you're 20, it's the hot guy with the hot car, right?
Right.
When you're 30, you'd really like him to have a job. When you're 40, you'd like a little stability or something like that. So it changes over the decades, right? And so I think I was in my right around 40 when I started, and it was about a 2-year tossing into this imaginary God box. And again, I was looking at that point for someone with character, a good relationship with their family. If they've got kids, they're grown. I don't want to raise anybody's kids. That they were active with God in a relationship with a sponsor and sponsoring and principles and some of those basic AA qualities. And then I put a couple in there that were pretty unusual that came into my mind. Gosh, wouldn't it be cool if he was like a doctor, a daytime doctor, not not an ER doctor. And my husband's a dentist. And then the last one was the weirdest one. I thank God I'd like him to be a widower because the relationship is concluded. Not that you don't miss the person, but they stayed to the end. And when I met Kent, I had no idea that those were part of his package, if you will.
Yeah.
So we went on our first date 6 weeks later, and I had a policy of I don't kiss anybody in the first 30 days. And when I pass that on to the women I sponsor, you can hear the thud of their jaw dropping. Okay. I said, look, that's just for me, because you see, I rushed into potential and I had all kinds of dreamland going on when those kinds of things started. Yeah. And there'd been no getting to know each other, no other types of spiritual, mental, emotional connection. It started physical, and then you work your way back. And so when I met Kent, and then 6 weeks after our first date, we got engaged at the International in Minneapolis.
Wow.
So it wasn't like we took a long time. As he likes to say, I got an engagement ring before he got a kiss. Well, that's the way it went. So, and we've been married 23 years and still love hanging out with each other.
Oh,
I didn't know that was possible.
That is fantastic.
We came to have a conversation about sex, and we ended up having a conversation about faith and about honesty and about courage. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A lot of fun.
Yeah.
Folks, we want to hear your thoughts on sex and living sober. Call and leave us a message. You can find the number at aagrapevine.org. Click on the podcast button up top. Thanks to everyone who subscribes to the Grapevine magazine in print or in the AA Grapevine app. Your support makes this podcast possible.
I'm at the very wit's end. Cuckoo.
Despite sometimes having an arrogant exterior, an alcoholic is very much capable of such feelings as love, affection, intimacy, and caring. However, these feelings usually don't involve anyone else.
It's really not that funny.
Thanks for joining us. The AA Grapevine Half Hour Variety Hour is posted every Monday and is produced by AA Grapevine, Inc. We don't speak for AA as a whole. We share the experience, strength, and hope of members to help others recover from alcoholism. Podcast info, including how to call in, is at aagrapevine.org/podcast. Search AA Grapevine in the App Store on your phone or find AA Grapevine on Instagram and YouTube. All things Grapevine are available at aagrapevine.org. If you want to know more about AA, search online for Alcoholics Anonymous in your city or visit aa.org.
That was freaking amazing.